a learning experience for the Liberian justice system, legal practitioners, human rights institutions, and CSOs. I would like to thank the moderator and all the panelists for agreeing to be part of this webinar. I want to specifically thank the Ambassador of Sweden to Liberia, Her Excellency, Madame Ingrid Wettersvis, for not only agreeing to be part of this panel, but also for being part of the team that came up with the original idea of holding periodic discussions of governance in Liberia. On that note, I look forward to very exciting discussions, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Parlamin Bayai, for those remarks. I'll immediately hand over to Simone Harry of OHCHR. Over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Roland. Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden, Her Lordship, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of OHCHR, I welcome you to this important and timely webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the rule of law. OHCHR counted that currently there are globally 112 countries which have adopted measures that restrict freedom of assembly, 86 states that have declared states of emergency which temporarily restrict some freedoms and rights, 33 states that have adopted measures that restrict freedom of expression, and 29 states that have adopted measures infringing on privacy rights. Taken together, these restrictions pose an enormous and, in our lifetime, unprecedented challenge to the rule of law. Some of the human rights concerns relating to rule of law, which OHCHR documented, including some of them in the West Africa region, are measures to control the flow of information and crack down on freedom of expression and press freedom against an existing background of shrinking civic space, arrest, detention, prosecution, or persecution of political opponents, journalists, doctors, and healthcare workers, activists, and others for allegedly spreading fake news, aggressive cyber policing and increased online surveillance, postponement of election, which is raising serious constitutional issues in some cases and may lead to rising tensions. OHCHR's key messages in respect to rule of law and access to justice during the pandemic are: fundamental requirements of fair trial must be respected during emergency situations. In other words, there is no derogations on fundamental fair trial guarantees. States should continue to take specific measures to guarantee the independence of the judiciary, and courts must remain competent and capable to evaluate and, if necessary, nullify any unlawful imposition or unjustified extension of emergency measures. Courts should also remain competent for other urgent measures, including habeas corpus. And any alternative measures put in place, such as remote hearings, should be exceptional, temporary, and with appropriate safeguards. Ladies and gentlemen, in April 2020, the Secretary General launched his policy brief on COVID-19 and human rights. Some of the key messages of the policy brief are: the threat is the virus, not the people. No country can beat this alone. When we recover, we must be better than we were before. With this in mind, I thank all the panelists for accepting to be on this webinar, and I thank UNDP for organizing this webinar and for doing this together with OHCHR. And I wish us fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone, for those great remarks. I'll now move over to introducing the moderator, who I think needs very little introduction. I first of all want to thank him for stepping in at a very short notice, since our original moderator had very specific circumstances and could not be with us. I was hoping that I would bring the current moderator, Ben, as a surprise, but I realized that in the uniqueness of what has occurred, the viewers and members of the public have had insights into the behind the scenes preparation, which occurred like 10 minutes previously. So Ben made me to promise that I will not say much about him. And I think this is because his reputation precedes him. Ben Malo is currently the chief editor at UN News, United Nations headquarters. He has a sterling career as senior communications officer at various levels, including as advisor to the president of the 66th session of the UN General Assembly, His Excellency Nasir Abdulaziz Al-Nasir, as associate spokesperson to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and also served as presidential spokesperson and director of communications for President John Mahama of Ghana. But he also has a connection to Liberia, and he had previously worked with the mission UNMIL and followed and worked very closely on areas relating to sexual and gender-based violence. So he's no stranger to the topic and to the context. Over and above that, I think we are all aware, and his golden voice came to prominence as a stringer, if I may use that term, at the BBC flagship program, News and Current Affairs on BBC Focus on Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to hand you over to our distinguished moderator, Ben Doste Malo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roland Cole. Thank you for allowing me to serve. I also want to say thank you to resident representative Pa Lamin Bayai of UNDP in Liberia, and also thank you to Simone Very of the Office of the UN's High Commissioner on Human Rights. Before I say welcome to all the attendees, please let me offer a word of apology in case you are having any technical difficulties, because I realize here I am talking to you from UN headquarters. The offices are actually there because of COVID-19. So I'm alone in an office that is usually occupied by more than 60 people. So if you are having any technical difficulties listening to us, please go into the chat box and let us know so that behind the scenes we can all be on the same page. I offer everyone in this webinar, the distinguished panelists, and every attendee, I welcome you to this discussion on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the rule of law for Liberia in a comparative perspective. Before I go ahead to make the introduction of all our distinguished speakers, let me just mention that our session over the next hour and a half will be broken down into 3 separate discussions of about 25 minutes each. The first roundtable discussion will involve the identification of the issues and the country experiences for Liberia related to the COVID-19 pandemic, its effects regarding sexual and gender-based violence, and also how this has affected the rule of law efforts in Liberia. That is what we will look at over the next 25 minutes. Then the second round of discussions will focus on the country responses. What are the responses from Liberia in addressing this particular challenge at this time? And then we will have 20 minutes of questions and answers. So please, if you are listening to us, you are part of this webinar, and you have any questions and answers, begin to put them in the chat box, please. And you can even have them ready when we start. We may be able to look at your raised hand and allow you to ask the questions after the second round of discussion. And then to conclude everything in the third round of discussions, we are not here just to have a talk shop. what are the solutions? What are the recommendations? How do we help the victims of some of these measures resulting from COVID-19, especially women and girls who are suffering most because of the impact of COVID-19? And so we will have some recommendations, and after that, then we will wrap up the session. And so once again, we thank you for joining us this Wednesday morning, the 16th of September. Again, my name is Ben Malo, and I have fond memories of serving as the spokesperson and director of information for ANMIL for 2 years from 2006. And I'm happy to see that this issue is being addressed. So we have a distinguished panel of high-profile speakers for this webinar. They all have strong backgrounds and expertise in the legal and justice sectors. They also have specific expertise on the issue of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as human rights. Every one of our panelists today has something valuable that can help us understand what is really happening and how we can solve the problem or how we can address these challenges effectively. So let me proceed now to offer brief introductions of each panelist. I could say things that are 1 page long about each panelist, but allow me, for the sake of time, that I would compress their distinguished CVs into just a few lines. First of all, let me mention Councillor Felicia V. Coleman, a former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Liberia. She is currently the co-chair of the Law Reform Commission of Liberia. I have to point out she has served as the chief prosecutor for sexual and gender-based violence crimes in Liberia from 2009 to 2013 in the Ministry of Justice. On this panel, Councillor Coleman is representing the Association of Female Lawyers of Liberia. Councillor Coleman, we welcome you. And next, I'm going to introduce briefly Ambassador Ingrid Wetterquist. She's the ambassador of Sweden to Liberia. She presented her letters of credence to Her Excellency President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf on the 13th of July, 2017. So that was 3 years ago. Ambassador Wetterquist has worked on development, cooperation, and migration issues for many years. She's almost an African because she has previously worked in the Swedish embassies in Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Namibia, and also within the Swedish Foreign Affairs Ministry. She has been desk officer for South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. Ambassador, we welcome you today. Let me move to Nigeria, and we have the distinguished Lordship, Her Lordship Justice Matilda Abrakasa Ayemiye. She is a judge of the High Court of Bayelsa State in Nigeria, and she has also been a leader for FIDA, the International Federation of Female Lawyers within Bayelsa State. Your Lordship, Justice Matilda Abrakasa Ayemiye, forgive me for your short introduction. I could go on for the rest of this webinar. And then we move to the Gambia. From Nigeria, we have a distinguished gentleman from the Gambia who happens to be the chair of the Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, Mr. Emmanuel Juf. He is a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of the Gambia, a veteran lawyer, a former magistrate, and a human rights expert with both international and international national and international experience. He also headed the African Society for International and Comparative Law, the Banjul branch. And I'm happy to also state that he's a former staff member of the United Nations, having worked for the UN Refugee Agency in his capacity as protection, repatriation, and refugees status determination officer in refugee camps in the Sudan. He's also made a huge impact in South Sudan. And ladies and gentlemen, bear with me to go to the last but not the least. We return to Liberia, to one of our sisters who is very, very passionate about the issue of sexual and gender-based violence, Lovette Saidi Sie. She's a staff member of Liberia's Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection. She's assigned in the Gender-Based Violence Division in our ministry. She has a wealth of experience on issues of gender. She's very passionate, and she has a lot of hope that one day gender-based violence can be eliminated in Liberia. So distinguished panelists, distinguished attendees, I hope the technical problems I am hearing with some crackles on the line are not so bad at your end. If they are, please go into the chat box, let us know so that we can have a smooth road ahead. Welcome once again to this webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the rule of law. We are looking specifically at Liberia in a comparative perspective. And so let me go ahead and open the round one of our discussions, which is the identification of the issues and the country experiences. I expect each of the panelists to speak for 3 to 5 minutes so we can have time to interact. If you want to intervene at any point, just raise your hand electronically and I will be obliged to invite you in to make your point. And so COVID-19 has resulted in the enactment of many policies, laws, and regulations as a way of trying to contain the pandemic. And yet the justice sector, which should help address differences between governments and citizens due to the implementation of some of these laws and regulations, is getting stretched, especially in Liberia. Our question for this first round of discussions to all the panelists is, how has this dissonance, disconnect, or challenge, how has this been managed in Liberia and possibly for the whole of the West African sub-region? And so maybe we should begin to hear directly from Liberia. I'm going to call on Councillor Coleman, Felicia V. Coleman, to give us her perspective. Councillor Coleman, you have the floor. Please unmute your button, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. As indicated, I'm Councillor Coleman, and I have worked with the justice system for many years, and so I know some of the issues and the problems within the justice system. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, our justice system has been challenged with many issues relating to enhancing and accessing justice to the citizens. Even though much has been done by the government and our international supporters to enhance access to justice, and even though many laws have been amended and many laws have been enacted, Yet these challenges are still existing, and the government efforts have done a lot in the past to do away with these challenges, but these challenges still exist. Some of the challenges include insufficient courts and judges, large backlog of cases on the dockets of all of the courts, our complex adjudication of cases, not sufficient lawyers, among many others. Along with these challenges, the COVID-19 pandemic brought about even further challenges, because to contain and manage the COVID-19 pandemic, the government of Liberia was forced to institute a state of emergency, which state of emergency curtailed movements of people, a lockdown that started on the 21st of April and lasted for 60 days, allowing people to only go out when necessary and in case of emergencies, and declaring some agencies of government and some employees non-essential. However, with all of this, the government still, there is still some agencies of government that did not complete the lockdown. They did scale down. In fact, almost all of the different agencies of government scaled down, and their staff, non-essential support staff, were reduced. Some agencies of government that were not declared essential included all of the law enforcement and security agencies, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Health, Foreign Ministry, and some other agencies were declared essential, and some measures were taken by these different agencies to help. Of course, firstly, the Ministry of Health and the National Public Health Institute of Liberia got together and put together protocols to ensure the safety of people. And at this point in time, I would like to commend the government of Liberia and its many partners for the manner in which they have managed the COVID-19 pandemic. And at where we are now, we are happy that there are not many positive cases, and there are many individuals who have been healed and discharged from isolation centers. So we know that people were forced to remain at home, locked down, not able to move around. So some of the measures that were taken, I will start with the judiciary. The judiciary were forced again to suspend jury trials in courts. The judiciary had to let go close to 65% of the staff on a forced pandemic vacation. Cases in all of the courts were reduced to only 2 a day, in the morning and in the evening. In the afternoon, only 2 cases. The Supreme Court slowed down hearing cases, and only special cases were heard at first. And then when the number of COVID-19 cases was increasing, the Supreme Court of Liberia itself had to close down hearing cases for a while. Only the Chamber Justice Office remained open for hearing and issuing remedial rates. All right, so with the police, again, we had the same problem with the police, who were used to curtail and manage crimes. They had some issues, and they have one of the most challenging manner in which they can handle the increase in COVID-19 and the increase in crimes. So the police itself had to scale down, but of course, all of the specific law enforcement officers continued to work, and only the some support staff had to go on forced leave. So what happened with the police? With the support from the United Nations Development Program, 10 hotlines that ran for 24 hours were installed, and those lines were in which they were used for especially HGBV survivors or to report these cases to the police. The police reached out to survivors by using commercial motorbikes because of lack of sufficient logistics with the Women and Children Protection Section that is responsible for handling issues relating to women and children. So they had to reach out with them, and they were in most instances challenged. There were not funding. And when I spoke to the deputy in charge of the Women and Children Protection Section, he informed me that in most instances, the police officers had to use their own funds to pay the motorcycles or the motorbikes to get to the crime scene and to be able to interview and start the investigation. And then I inquired from him whether the survivors had to pay anything, and they said that during this time, no survivor had to pay. So a lot of measures have been done and have been taken by the government of Liberia. However, like we said, unless we can look at these challenges, some I name, and hopefully during the discussion, we'll be recommending how we can manage these challenges so that victims and survivors will be able to properly access justice, and that they will be properly cared for, and that the judicial system will once more be able to come back, and that hopefully very soon we'll be able to enhance access to justice that will be affordable, and justice that will be accessible to victims, not only to victims of sexual violence, but to the citizen in general. I'll end there for the time being. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. You've just managed to give us an overview for 10 minutes. We are going to, no, but you captivated us about how already the justice system was already challenged, the state of emergency efforts by the Liberian government, especially how the courts were affected and they closed down because they couldn't do what they need to do. And I'm fascinated by the fact that the LNP, the Liberian National Police, had to use motorbikes to crime scenes and pay their own money. So we will look at some of those things. Again, to get the Liberian perspective properly before I go to maybe related regional experiences in Nigeria and the Gambia, let me go to our sister Lovette. Lovette Said is here. Could you add to the voice of Councillor Coleman and just tell us from your perspective the nature of the issue as you see it, so that we can hear from you and then move beyond Liberia to bring other perspectives. Sister Lovette, over to you. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Ben. Good afternoon to all, and thanks to the host for having me on this panel. So talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the rule of law in Liberia, the COVID-19 pandemic actually impacted the timely adjudication of cases here in Liberia, and one way or the other affected the timeliness in SGBV survivors, accessing justice. So the coming of this pandemic brought about changes to the rule of law. Matter of fact, like Sister Coleman spoke about, the judiciary placed a moratorium on the jury trial And at the same time, some other non-violent crimes that would normally carry a minimum penalty were also just mediated, and offenders were allowed to go free due to the crisis. And this was all in an effort to curtail the overcrowding of prisons, and even the number of stars assigned at these various courts were also reduced. And to a certain extent, it affected the normal operations. But the struggle to uphold the rule of law comes with a lot of challenges, okay, that cannot be taken away, especially where courts and other bodies who have oversights, on operations were kind of restricted in a way. And with the COVID-19, the decongestion of prison was just a major thing that we looked at, because if care was not taken, the overcrowding would have led to disproportionate high infection rates, and also both the inmates and staff that were assigned there will get infected and thus also spread into the communities. So with other countries in the sub-regions, I don't really know how it worked, but I know Nigeria had to kind of experiment the thing about virtual courts, whereas for us in Liberia, we didn't have the means to go to that regard. But the Ministry of Gender had this intervention, that is the establishment of a Women and Girls Pillow as part of the COVID-19 intervention. And this pillow here coordinated gender actors to ensure that their support and contributions to the justice sector were also timely and appropriate. As a result of this pillow, we also have a call center that's in readiness to be established. And we also have active case finders that are all in the field, trying to engage community members and encourage them to report. We also have our social workers who are also in the field too. All of the one-stop centers that provide free services to survivors of SGBV are also functional. And at the level of the Ministry of Gender, we know that there are challenges, but with COVID-19, we couldn't hold back just to keep on doing what we can do to ensure that SGBV comes to an end.
Sister Lovette, we thank you for that brief presentation. You have saved us a lot of minutes, so I owe you some Liberian dollars for that. Let me just confirm, are you saying that the call center is yet to be established?
It's established, but it's not fully functional.
Okay.
So we're still putting our pieces together to ensure that it gets fully functional and serve the internal purpose.
Okay, so maybe when we come to recommendation, it's going to be critical. Most of our sisters, our young women who are the victims of some of these challenges, everyone has a mobile phone. They should be able to call and report the situations, and the call center is going to be a critical.
And that is the essence. That is the essence, easy access, yeah.
Okay, so we are taking note. That is one strong recommendation. Thank you, Sister Lovette, Sadie's here in Monrovia. Now we are going to expand a little bit beyond Liberia, because you mentioned Nigeria, and we are really blessed to have on this webinar a distinguished woman, someone that others can look forward to, Her Lordship Justice Matilda Abrakasa Ayemiye. She's a judge of the High Court in Bayelsa State, Nigeria. Our Sister Lovette mentioned Nigeria. So, Your Lordship, may I come to you for your views about what you've heard so far and how we can relate it in a Nigerian or ECOWAS context, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And thank you for UNDP for inviting me for this webinar. I hope you can hear me. And we all know that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm good to go. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, almost all social institutions, inclusive of the courts, were shut down. For us in Nigeria, on the 23rd of March, 2020, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Honorable Mr. Justice Tanko Mohammed, issued a circular, an order that, as a preventive measure, all heads of court should suspend court sittings for a period of 2 weeks at the first instance, except in matters that are urgent, essential, or time-bound, according to the extant laws. This directive, of course, was swiftly complied with by the courts nationwide. So in the first instance, we had a break for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, we were not sitting. All the courts were shut down for us to put preventive measures in place. So the courts were shut down. But after that, I want to talk about Bayelsa State because it will not be fair for me to talk about other states. Let me talk about my state, Bayelsa State, which is in the south region of Nigeria. Eventually, the courts were reopened. As a whole in Nigeria, when the courts were reopened, virtual court sitting was introduced in Nigeria for the first time so that we will not have a delay of cases, especially criminal cases, because a lot of the criminal cases, maybe the accused persons are in prison custody. So we didn't want a situation like that in Nigeria. So quickly it was introduced virtual court sitting. And some Nigerian citizens went to court to say that the virtual court sitting is not constitutional. And thank God the Supreme Court of Nigeria gave its judgment and said the virtual court sitting is constitutional. So since then, there has been virtual court sitting in most of the states as it's convenient for the state.
Justice Ayemi, I wouldn't do this in your court, but forgive me. We want to hear you clearly and the quality of your line. We want to see if you get closer to the gadget you are using, whether that would improve. So if you could talk a little bit closer, let's see if that would improve.
Are you hearing me well now? Are you hearing me well now?
Okay. So yeah, even getting closer.
I'm very close to it. I'm very close to it.
Okay. In that case, pull back a little bit. Let's see if we can hear you better when you move. Please talk to us.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
I think it's better when you move a little bit away. Forgive us for...
Okay, I've moved a little bit away. Is that okay?
I think if you have headphones, have them ready. That is the advice I'm getting. But you are better when you move back. When you come close, then we get the distortions. If I were in your court now, I would be in trouble for interrupting you, Your Lordship, so forgive me. Please.
No, it's okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We can hear you. It's a bit clearer. So try again, please. Please go ahead.
Let me just say here that, I'm in the south region of Nigeria, and this is the period of the rainy season, and it's been raining cats and dogs since yesterday. So the network is not too good.
Okay, so here is what Your Lordship, here is what I'm going to do. Hold on your thoughts. See if you can get a pair of headphones to use. If you don't have headphones, don't worry. Let me go to the Gambia and I will come back to you whilst you try so that we can hear you very clearly. I apologize to all attendees and all the panelists. Your Lordship, it's not your fault. Just bear with us. We are going to go to the Gambia and then we will come back to, yes. And so, distinguished panelists, distinguished attendees, please bear with us. We are striving for the best, and without taking too much of your time, I want to take us to hear from the Gambia, to hear from Mr. Emmanuel Daniel Juf, who is a distinguished Gambian and chair of the Gambia's first ever National Human Rights Commission. He's a former staff member of the UN, done great service in Sudan and South Sudan. Barrister and Solicitor Juf, I'm sure we can get better quality maybe from you before we go back to Her Lordship. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can hear me from Little Gambia. Am I clear?
Yes, we can hear you. We are getting a bit of crackle, but we hope it is better as you talk. If you move your head back a little bit, then talk to us, please.
Okay, are you still getting the crackle or is it getting better?
We can hear you. We don't think the problem is necessarily from you, and they are working on it behind the scenes. So just begin to speak with us and we will figure it out, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, my panel members, and I'm happy to have been invited to be part of this panel. As the chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, our mandate, which is very broad, it is promoting and protecting human rights in the Gambia. And the mandate involves investigating, monitoring, receiving complaints, advising the government, also sitting as a quasi-judicial body. We have this broad mandate. So when unfortunately, COVID-19 stormed our continent, we thought it was a China problem. It wasn't. And when the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic, the Gambia on 26th of March declared a state of emergency, the president. And of course, with the state of emergency comes regulations, emergency regulations and laws. And those laws involve, briefly, if I may just give you a summary, flights were banned, except for medical and cargo flights. The borders were closed, the land borders were closed. Commercial public transport was restricted. Commercial drivers were only told to carry half capacity of their passengers. Of course, the same way it was with the ferries. Mandatory quarantine of suspected cases was done. Bars were closed, casinos were closed. So the country was on partial lockdown. Schools, for example, were closed. Universities were closed. Non-essential businesses were closed. Restaurants were closed only for takeaway services. And of course, the emergency powers were renewed. They have been renewing them since March. And as I speak to you, we're still under emergency powers and the regulations. And this also involved the compulsory wearing of masks in public places. The curfew was introduced some 40 days ago. And we now have a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. in the morning. So in effect, what I'm saying is that the emergency powers and the regulations used to enforce the emergency powers affected civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights of all Gambians. And I think the story is really the same. I've listened to the summary given in Liberia, and the law and my lord from Nigeria was actually giving us a synopsis of also what the issues and the problems are. But I think they are the same everywhere. But of course, what it has done is that it has impacted, it has affected fundamental rights and freedoms of everybody. Yes, the emergency powers were necessary, but it has restrictions on fundamental rights. And just to quickly say, for example, if you look at freedom of assembly, in the Gambia with our newfound freedom, everybody since Yahya Jammeh departed, everybody now is a social activist. We've been having people demonstrating, talking, that has now had to be curtailed. So the civic space itself was limited, and for good reasons. But again, we were worried as a National Human Rights Commission. We understand that we need to curtail the virus, but of course, the worry always is that government will use these things to curtail fundamental rights and freedom. Restriction of movements, closure of public places. Again, we're talking about restricting the movements of people. The curfew was one. Closure of freedom of religion. As you know, we had to close mosques and churches, although now they are open, but still under restrictive orders. But again, the right to even worship has been affected. Right to education. If you look at most countries like the Gambia, schools were closed. Again, for those who were in the private schools, yes, and their parents could afford, internet, their children could have online classes. But what about those, the majority, who do not have access to these things? So right to education was also affected. Right to medical health. We know that most African countries, our health systems have been challenged anyway. And now you bring in COVID-19 and it added to the problems. The issue is this: we are trying to sort out COVID-19. What do we do now with malaria? We have reports in our health system that more women are dying now during childbirth. Is it because of COVID-19? And we think that there is a correlation because we have neglected one aspect because of the challenges. So all the other health facilities are all concentrated on ways of treating COVID-19. Right to a living, livelihood. Of course, as I've mentioned, in the Gambia, we had one of the emergency regulation was to close down non-essential services. So a lot of people really suffered. We as a national, perhaps I will talk about it later, what we have done to try and alleviate the situation with the government. But a lot of people who lived on a daily basis, hand to mouth, they had to close their shops. They didn't have to, the markets were closed, open at very limited hours. So this also affected many, many, many people, even commercial drivers. The government, through our intervention and others, cut down on the price of fuel. But if you're telling them, if you have a 20-seater passenger, you're telling them to only carry 10, and they're applying the same route and using the same fuel, you are affecting their livelihood. But also what we discovered was the issue of stigma. Stigma in the sense that a lot of awareness raising needed to be done about COVID-19. People who had COVID-19 or suspected to have COVID-19 or their family members were stigmatized. So this is another issue that through our monitoring, we discovered that it is a problem. So those who had COVID-19 or their family members or those even who were cured had actually problems. But another bigger problem when it comes to fundamental human rights was with all these regulations and the laws that are in place, you need a police force to actually enforce this regulation. Implementation of this became a problem. The heavy-handedness of the police. The police were also challenged. They were not even prepared. For example, we have law on not wearing masks. If you don't wear a mask currently, which equivalent of $20 fine. And can the police all this? And you have people who will pay, those who won't pay. What happens to those who can't pay? Do you put them in jail? And remember, like Nigeria, like Liberia, our courts have all scaled down, which is a big problem. So access to justice is a big problem right now, in the sense that when the courts are not operating, what do you do with remand prisoners? Remand prisoners are in languishing in the remand wing. What about if you detain and arrest suspects and put them in police cells? Our law says that within 72 hours, you have to bring them before a competent court of law. If the courts of law are not operating, what do you do? And we have actually gone to police cells, and we've discovered they're overcrowding in these police cells. So this is the ripple effect of issues surrounding COVID-19. As I said, what happens to them when they cannot pay fine? Are they released on bail? Speedy trial, of course, there cannot be any speedy trials when we have scaled down on the courts. The courts are not operational, and they have they're functioning in a very limited capacity. Then we have issues relating to remand. What about trial? What about those whose appeals are pending? Overcrowding is a problem. We had to actually write to the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Interior. For them, I think a lot of countries have, in West Africa, it appears, have done that. Because as if you have been following in countries like Brazil and Uganda, there has been a spike in infection in the prisons because of overcrowding. We asked the president to exercise the prerogative of mercy by looking at prisoners who have served almost coming to the end of their term, to those prisoners who were convicted but of non-violent conviction, criminal offenses, and also those who were convicted but the conviction was not of a sexual offense. So, and we were very happy that it was a petition, when it went to the Justice Ministry, it was reviewed and 125 prisoners of the category that we mentioned were actually released. But these are many problems that we have, apart not only in Gambia but in the sub-region. And I think during the course of our discussion, we can talk about them. We can perhaps look at other. We can make recommendations and learn from the best practices of what others have and what can be done to alleviate this problem that has come to all of us. So I think I will stop now so that we can
Thank you.
Discussion. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Mr. Juve. I will try and go back. We are pushing very hard against time. We are going to be challenged by time because the discussion is very important. But before we proceed, let me I will go back to Her Lordship Justice Ayemye in a moment. But let me just put this question to the ambassador of Sweden to Liberia, because Sweden has been playing a key role in Liberia on these issues. And so I'm going to turn now to Ambassador Ingrid Wetterquist. Ambassador, Sweden being a key donor in Liberia has also been affected by the pandemic, but to what extent has that guided your support to the rule of law sector in Liberia, and also how Sweden's drive for democracy has impacted governance and rule of law in Liberia? Over to you, Ambassador Wetterquist.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. You're doing a beautiful exercise in Swedish there. Thank you to the organizers, and allow me to stand on all existing protocol to the fellow panelists. I think what I would like to reiterate, what has already been said, is that the problems in the justice sector in Liberia, they existed before COVID-19, and Councillor Coleman elaborated considerably on that. And we have, of course, seen the backlog of the SGBV cases, the prisons overcrowding, the infringements of the rights of pre-trial detainees. And COVID hasn't made this easier in any sense for Liberians or for the partners. What I think has really shaken this society is the increase in rape and in SGBV, and in particular some high-profile cases involving very young persons. And the good thing is the reaction of society, the fact that society mobilized on these demonstrations, and we could see individuals and organizations and government officials and international communities side by side trying to come to terms with this societal problem, and then the relatively swift response from President Weah and the Minister for other actors in organizing the national conference anti-rape and anti-STBV, resulting in a roadmap, the cabinet meeting, and the declaration of rape as a national emergency. Must say this is an impressive outcome and a good outcome of what is a difficult situation. And listening to Mr. Joof, I think all the human rights infringements that have been a consequence of COVID-19 are there, and they should lead us to really look at the secondary impacts of the pandemic, which are the results of the actions to limit the pandemic itself, in particular on the economy, on people's livelihoods, on children's rights to go to school. There might be a year of schooling lost for many children in a country like Liberia, and these losses they're different. I don't think they are enough analyzed, and these are something that we need to take a look at. As regards our activities in Liberia, the staff working on development cooperation took a look at the entire portfolio. Certain things were delayed, certain things couldn't be done, certain things needed to be changed in terms of what was emphasized. This freed up some extra funding for the SGBV sector via UNICEF, in particular to assist children in contact with the legal system, which is legal aid and social services, and economic empowerment, in particular to young people through the World Bank. So there were marginal changes in our activities in Liberia. So COVID hasn't changed that much. Of course, there was also on a global level a huge influx of extra funding to the UN system globally, and some of them also have reached Liberia. So I think I end there in my intervention. Thank you.
Tusen tak. I hope I got that right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Wetterquist. Let's go back to your Lordship, Justice Abrakasa Ayemyeye. Please give us maybe a 2-minute summary, and we may have to go straight into the second round of our discussions. But let's hear from you first, your perspectives, Madam Judge.
Like I said before, that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the courts in Nigeria were closed by a circular sent by the Chief Justice of Nigeria. And in Bayelsa State, the Chief Judge, because of the pandemic, had to go for a jail delivery. And release some of the those awaiting trial, so that to decongest the courts. And accelerated hearing of criminal custodial matters was instituted in my state, Bayelsa State, and criminal delinquency was streamlined. Only litigants and witnesses were allowed into the court hall, and safety measures were put in place. You cannot enter the court even till date without your face mask. And even before the COVID pandemic, we had gotten a circular from the Chief Justice of Nigeria that we should accelerate criminal cases, hearing of criminal cases. So in Bayelsa State, we gave ourselves between 1 year and 18 months for us to finish our criminal cases. So with this pandemic, we had to reopen after 2 weeks. We were given to the Chief Justice at the first instance. The court should be closed for 2 weeks at the first instance, certain matters that are urgent and essential. So even during the lockdown, so to say, some courts were sitting. And after the 2 weeks, just 2 weeks after that, the Chief Judge called us back and told us that we should go and hear criminal cases. So we started hearing criminal cases, at least 1 or 2 a day, not more than 2, because we didn't want the court halls to be crowded. And during that period too, in my court, I delivered judgments, because there are judgments in Nigeria. After the close of meeting addresses or addresses of both counsel, you cannot exceed 90 days. You must deliver your judgment. So for all those cases that were already due for judgment, we had to deliver them during that period. So the fact, though, yes, the normal courts were not sitting, but for criminal cases we were sitting. We have been sitting up till date. Only the normal vacation we had from August, 1st of August to Monday 14th, I'm back at work. So only that time, and we had about 3 judges on ground who were the vacation judges. So most of the criminal cases were going on, cases that were for sexual and gender-based violence cases. They were all going on in the courts. We were hearing evidence, all those criminal cases. The chief judge of Bayelsa State wanted us to make sure that accelerated hearing of the cases were granted, and we should not stop trials because of the pandemic.
Okay.
So that's what we're doing here.
Okay. We will come back to you. When we do, take your time, Your Lordship. You can speak a bit slowly. You are not too fast. It's just a technical problem, and you can slowly, so that whatever the technical challenges are, I'm also trying hard here at your headquarters to slow down, so that we can. Your views are very important. Thank you, everyone, so far. I'm seeing a lot of comments in our chat box. We will try to address them as we go. Somebody is saying, I didn't hear anything regarding the police brutality during COVID-19, especially against the women that were harassed and wounded, as well as youth that violated the COVID state of emergency regulations in Liberia. The vulnerable women and children were left alone to fetch food for the family. Please, can the Liberian panelists address this issue? So, Councillor Coleman and Sister Lovett, please take note of that. Again, I want to apologize to everyone listening for any distortion in the sound that you've been exposed to. We are doing our best technically. And then I hear somebody here saying, I didn't hear of any directive intervention. I think Joseph Kamara is saying that he didn't hear of any direct intervention or assessment from victims of rape or SGB from Councillor Coleman's information shared. So maybe we will come to that. Councillor Coleman is listening. Now, Moses Massa from UNDP in Liberia, did sexual and gender-based violence cases increase during the state of emergency in Liberia? I think that is a good question to move me into the next round. We are working very hard against time, and I would ask each of the panelists, when it comes to you, to just spend as short a time as you can and be succinct in your responses, because now we want to go into country responses. We want to have a brief discussion because, yes, as Mr. Massa asked, there has been an increase in sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia during this period of COVID-19, the pandemic. In fact, according to the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection of Liberia, there were a total of 953 cases of sexual and gender-based violence between January to May this year alone, and affecting mainly women and girls, including very young children. And so our first question is going to be, how has the justice sector in Liberia, and that includes law enforcement agencies, the police, and all others, how has the justice sector coped with this increase in cases of sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia? And maybe if we can hear from the Gambia Chairman Emmanuel Daniel Juf, and also when we go to Bayelsa State, Your Lordship, Judge Abrakasa Ayemiye, how has the justice sector coped when we get an increase in cases of maybe domestic violence or sexual and gender-based violence? So let me start with Councillor Coleman. Briefly, tell us how the justice sector in Liberia has coped, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And as I indicated when I was answering or trying to address the first question, I did mention some of the things the different agencies or different branches in the justice system try to cope with these, the increase. And I did mention that for reporting purposes, the police, with support from UNDP, set up 10 hotlines that went for 24 hours a day, and that was used as a means for reporting. When it comes to responses, there are 7 one-stop centers that are open around, most of them were around Monrovia, and those one-stop centers were still available, where victims or survivors are taking, and where they can have received medical support. They can receive counseling at the one-stop center. They also can receive, the police can begin investigation, and the prosecutor is on call who can come there and begin for the prosecution of cases. But as we indicated, because the court closed down and we said there is only hear 2 cases at a time. There is a special court in Montserrat County, specifically for the prosecution of sexual offenses. Most rape cases are felony or capital offenses. The defendants are entitled to a jury trial. Jury trial was suspended. In fact, it is still suspended. It has that suspension has not been lifted. So all those defendants who demanded jury trial, their case were also suspended. Only those cases for those defendants who requested bench trial, where the judge serving as both the jury and the judge, those cases were heard. Again, as I indicated, there are not sufficient courts. Montserrat County, with a population of more than almost 2 million people, and with the high increase in sexual violence, there is only 1 court for the prosecution of sexual violence. Only 1 trial can be held at a time. And so in a criminal court E, only 1 jury trial can be held. Since jury trial was suspended, there were bench trials. There's only 1 single judge in 1 court. So even that's how I said that there are challenges that need to be tackled even before the beginning of the COVID-19. So when we come to recommendation and suggestions, we will mention, the issue of having more courts. When it comes to the police, and we mentioned those measures that we're taking. And yes, there have been reports of police, even before the war, even before the COVID-19, of compromising cases, of taking money from survivors, of allowing them to pay their way and come to the police for the investigation. Yes, these all happened. It's still happening. But I'm just saying that there are instances during this COVID-19 period where there were police who did pay their own way using their meager salary to pay their own way to be able to respond to doing these to calls from the hotline. Yes, when it comes to the prosecution side, again, there are not that many prosecutors, but they have to prosecute only in one court. What happened during this time, they were able to, however, indict more cases that were taken to the grand jury. In Liberia, all rape cases have to be indicted, taken to the grand jury before it can go to trial. At least during that time, since there were not that many trials, the prosecution used this opportunity to indict cases. I spoke to the chief prosecutor on yesterday, and she told me that there were many perpetrators who plea bargained. So there were many plea bargains during this period of time. And so they were able to handle those cases during this period of time. So yes, there have been some positive things during this great COVID-19 time to cope with the increase. But let's remember, our justice system has been really, really challenged. And so the COVID-19 period only added more to the challenge. Thank you, sir.
We thank you, Councillor Coleman. I'm going to turn quickly to Sister Lovette because we are looking at the country responses. So maybe I'll focus on our sisters who are in Liberia. Sister Lovette Saidi Sie, we are looking at the country responses. Is the justice sector coping well? Because Senlese Kweida is saying that the prison system is already challenged, so and continues to be challenged. And then Joshua Kula is also asking what are the numbers for the one-stop centers where people can report. If we have those numbers, they want to get these numbers. So Sister Lovette, also before you answer briefly, let me just let everybody over here. First of all, I want you to know we are almost 100 people in this webinar. So you are not alone participating. There is a lot to share. Number two, again, we thank you for your patience and tolerance, even with the technical difficulties we are having with the line. Number three, I'm going to advise Her Lordship Justice Ayemiye in Bayelsa State to just switch off her video. So we have her on audio alone. So when we come to the recommendations, she can give us the perspective from Bayelsa State, Nigeria. We think if you switch off or you mute your video, but you keep your audio on, that can help. With the rain that is falling in Bayelsa State, usually a lot of heavy rainfall is recorded in Monrovia, but it seems Monrovians have exported their rain to Justice Abrakasa Ayemiye in Bayelsa State. And so I just want everybody to know we appreciate you and we thank you. We are trying within the next 30, 45 minutes to see how to wrap this up and get some recommendations. Lovette, the justice sector in your country, Liberia, how is it coping? What are they doing right? Please speak with us, Lovette.
So actually, all of the enforcement agencies are part of the justice system because they one way or the other contribute to both prosecution and defense. So they are all involved with the fight against SGBV, but there still exist several challenges that also impede their work that cannot be overemphasized. So with the lockdown in Liberia, courts were not totally closed down. And the SGBV Crimes Unit, where Councillor Felicia Como once served as the chief prosecutor, conducted awareness campaigns in several counties. They went out and encouraged community members to be able to report SGBV cases to the courts or to other service providers. And because many persons then assumed that courts, were totally closed because we had a lockdown. So as a result of this, cases were heard, but also at a very low rate. So the sudden increase in cases during the COVID-19 pandemic was unimaginable, and it was just not an ordinary increase. At a certain point in time, it became brutal. So to a certain case, where an alleged perpetrator used a razor blade to pierce the private part of a survivor in order to get easy penetration as he committed that crime, that was just brutal in my mind, So during the period, when you put your radio on every day, it was just like rape cases. When you read the papers, you will see a lot of cases being reported. So this was just too much. And I believe this was one of the things that actually prompted the drafting of a national roadmap that would serve as a guide in achieving a wide range of SGBV issues. And during normal times, there should be something like an emergency preparedness plan that can just fizzle in when epidemic, sparks up. But unfortunately, we didn't have this. And mostly if you don't have an emergency preparedness plan and this kind of epidemic comes about, it shows the kind of loops in the system, okay? So when we We actually make plans. We also include the provision of essential services for victims of SGBV. And all thanks to the Embassy of Sweden, they've greatly supported the survivors to fund additional medicals and what have you. So Liberia took an action. We drafted a roadmap. However, the increase of SGBV, especially rape, just became an epidemic to deal with, because in times of a pandemic, every given society, women and children are the ones who are more vulnerable. And they tend to face a multiple crisis, because if you have the COVID-19, they have the SGBV crisis to deal with, so they have multiple. These homes are not even safe for them, okay? So the experience is so hard, and we cannot give up, because when we give up, it's the day that we are contributing to having it more. So SGBV services will remain available, and limited access to communication devices, also lack of privacy and other issues, you know, contributed to the increase. But during the state of emergency, during the lockdown, there were a lot of increase of SGBV cases in Liberia.
Thank you. It's what you have shared. One particular aspect is just so shocking. It's bad from what you're saying under normal times, and then it got worse with the pandemic. What I hear from you is that the issue of rape cases against women and young girls, young children, has become an epidemic within a pandemic. Is that correct? Is that a succinct way of putting it? So we have this.
Rape, yeah, during the lockdown,
pandemic.
It became.
Okay. We
and the
have
issue of rape became an epidemic within the pandemic. Yeah.
That is a very strong way of putting it. I have a question here from Helena Turo. And Helena is saying, I did not hear about the role of partners who complement the efforts of government to access justice. So that leads me straight away to turn to Ambassador Ingrid Wetterquist, because Sweden has been playing a key role in supporting the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia as a key partner. So let me turn quickly to Ambassador Wetterquist. What has been your key areas of support for the justice sector to prevent these kinds of situations we are hearing about? Ambassador Wetterquist, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for the question. We've had a flagship project together with the United Nations, the joint program against SGBV, which is now being evaluated and going towards its ends, and it's being replaced by and bridged to and taken further by a huge investment of the European Union, a project called Spotlight, which is also joint EU-United Nations, where the focus is to address SGBV in all its aspects, which includes, of course, also access to justice, and where the partners in turn are both public agencies, individual organizations, and advocacy organizations in Liberia. So this is a multi-level support to the mitigation of SGBV in Liberia. We have also contributed to the establishment of the specialized SGBV Courts E, providing legal aid and psychosocial support to survivors, including supporting the investigation capacity of the Women and Children Protection Section at the Liberian National Police, including vocational training of prison inmates. So it's really meant to be a multifaceted intervention, which is looking at the whole sector. And when it comes to SGBV and the roadmap, we will support its implementation. We will continue to be in this sector. And I would like to stress that there is a whole spectrum of things that needs to be done, from prevention in one end to punishment and rehabilitation of those who are offenders in the other end. And we need to intervene along all these lines, because if the focus is only on punishment and what happens after the crimes won't ever stop. So prevention needs to be an integral part of this, and that has many levels, and it has to do very much about values and attitudes and cultural habits. And it will require engagement by Liberians, because this is a Liberian issue. Nobody else can fix it for Liberians, and it will require innovative approaches that are coming out of this society, in particular from young people and women, of course, who are closest to these issues. Having said that, of course, it can't go unpunished, and the issue of impunity and the fact that certain behaviors that leads to rape or leads to STBV are still permitted or are glossed over, or the perpetrators walk around in the society without being marked in any sense, while the victim has to hide or has to go away, is a debate that Liberians need to have among Liberians, and to change this attitude and to place the responsibility where it is. I think.
Okay. Excellent submissions, Ambassador Veterquist. You are saying this is fundamentally a Liberian issue. Partners like Sweden and other nations can come to help, but Liberians own the issue, and partners will try to complement those efforts. You also made the key point of prevention being key, prevention versus punishment. But if we go to punishment, we will never solve the problem. Prevention must be key. And I like what you said about impunity. The behaviors, especially of those of us who are men and the boys, we need to own the problem. We are the ones committing the crimes. Prominent men in society must come out. And I think this is going into the recommendations area. It is not a women's problem. This is a men's and boys' problem. Impunity. If I have a relative, a young man or nephew who has committed rape, he shouldn't be walking around the society and freely as if the responsibility is on us, the men, and not on the women and the girls. So thank you very much, Ambassador Veterquist. We thank you. I realize that I'm desperately running against the clock. Please forgive me for my poor timekeeping. I am trying, and still we have nearly 100 people in this webinar, and we were supposed to have 20 minutes of question and answers, but because of time and the fact that I've been managing to put some of the questions out, we are going to go straight into recommendations for the next 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, to all the distinguished panelists. If I haven't called you, it's just because we are struggling to meet the need, but we don't want to leave this webinar without clear, solid, simple, practical suggestions and recommendations. So if you would pardon me, with the permission of Dr. Roland Cole and the main organizers, I want us to shift quickly for the next 20 to 25 minutes with succinct and direct and simple solutions to say, look, we know how bad things are. What do we need to do to stop little girls being molested or women being violently attacked, or to just curb, if not eliminate, drastically curb the issue of sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia? The national call to action for inclusive involvement to fight these issues has been launched by President George Oponweir and includes a national roadmap. So moving to recommendations now, what is your assessment of the roadmap? What innovative and creative ideas do you have for improving the roadmap? And the recommendations relating to the inclusion of reflective learning and opportunities for knowledge sharing from the jurisdictions. So I want to turn to the panelists. Even we can draw from any examples from the Gambia and Nigeria. I hope Judge Ayemyeye has muted her video, and maybe her sound can improve with the rain in the background. Please excuse us. So let's look at some solutions, and I'm going to take it quickly from outside to the inside. We will take it, Mr. Emmanuel Daniel Juve, chair of the Gambia's first ever Human Rights Commission. We are looking for recommendations, and we know this is a Liberian problem, but Mr. Juve, any idea, any
thank you very
recommendation?
much. Thank you very much. And I must say that I like the intervention of Ingrid because she has said something which I think we should always bear in mind, that changing attitude, it's a problem, and changing attitude takes a long time. And in doing so, you need to be effective, you need a multi-pronged approach to these things. You need a multi-pronged approach. If you don't have it, then you will have a problem. And I would say that what is needed in this, and I'm just reading briefly about Liberia, that you started, but you really need a robust task force comprising of all the relevant stakeholders who will meet regularly and then with action, not just talk shop. And you will have to involve the relevant authorities, the relevant stakeholders. It is the obligation and the duty of the state to respect, protect, and fulfill. We need to do that. But what is also important, and for example, when the COVID-19 pandemic and we started having the state of emergency, what we did quickly was we worked very closely with the UNTJ office. There is a Transitional Justice Project office in the Gambia. And together, as a National Human Rights Commission, we were very worried about issues, well, relating to sexual violence, in fact, we even just developed a handbook on sexual harassment and violence, because we felt that there is a lot of talk on these things, but even offices don't have a policy. What we have these myriads of laws in our country, implementation is bad because we have not even oriented those who are supposed to implement these laws, like the police. So we have embarked on a joint training program on human rights, but also on sexual and gender-based violence. There is no use and no point just having these laws. You need these laws, but we need to orient our own people from our homes, the offices. So here comes awareness raising. I believe awareness raising is very important. And we have started doing these things. Use the TV, use the radio. Let young girls know, even at the level of the school, you are not supposed to be violated. Let them have that confidence. Let them know that they can report. And that's why I'm saying that there is a multi-pronged approach that is needed with these things, especially if it is endemic in a country, like especially post-conflict countries like Liberia. A serious effort needs to be done. So that is just what I would want to say in that area, that the political will has to be there.
Okay.
Just don't talk about it. The political will must be there. And we have to work very closely with civil society organizations. And what we did quickly, although we have just been 18 months in place, we have a network where we actually help facilitate what we call CSO, a platform. These civil society organizations, they have a lot of information. They are working at the grassroots. They can be your solid partner to solving some of these issues. I think maybe I'll stop for now. There are a lot of other things I say, but I think...
okay. Mr.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Ju. No. Don't be sorry. We will get back to you. I'm seeing here on my screen, Jacqueline C. Samuel is saying, Mr. Moderator, I recommend that the recording of this webinar be shared with participants. So the organizers, Dr. Cole and the team in UNDP Liberia, they are listening. Thank you, Mr. Juve. I see also here that an anonymous attendee is saying that in order to improve the roadmap, the following institutions must be supported budgetary-wise. The judiciary must be supported, the police, the interreligious institutions must be involved, the Liberian National Bar must be engaged, advocacy, and the political will is needed. Just as Mr. Juve mentioned. I also have here quickly, before I try to turn to Judge Ayemiye in Bayelsa State, Dorsia is saying from all indications, COVID is going to remain with us for the unforeseeable future. What remedies are available to mitigate this issue of SGBVs, because it is at an alarming rate and COVID cannot be an excuse for increase in rape, for example, in Liberia. Then Joshua Kula, how many case finders are there across the country? Are there physiological support or psychological support available for the victims? Not a lot is being said about the victims. Also, he adds that the two panelists from Liberia are lawyers, or many of the panelists are lawyers. It would be great to share how legal and non-legal actors can get involved in tackling sexual and gender-based violence post-COVID. Then an anonymous attendee raises a very important issue, please. Victims of sexual and gender-based violence were not fed. They were not given food and catered for, and their situation went from bad to worse. So if I've been abused, if I've been attacked, if I've been raped, and I go to seek help, my situation should not go from bad to worse. Basically, focus on the victims and give them as much help as possible. It is now about 1:35 in Liberia. It's 9:35 here in New York at UN headquarters where I am. We are trying to contain, and then somebody is also saying coordination between the Ministry of Gender and all the SGBV actors must be improved in Liberia. We are still in the next 10-15 minutes looking for recommendations that will be easy to implement. It was mentioned on the need, this is Gerald Witherspoon, it was mentioned on the need of prominent male leaders to step forward and champion causes which are abhorrent to our societies, targeting young girls and women, including rape and sexual and gender-based violence. I think for me, as a man, as a brother, as a Ghanaian, as a Pan-Africanist who has had the opportunity to serve through the United Nations in Liberia, I am going to make this strong recommendation, and it's going to be critical until all of us, the men, all of us, the Liberian men and boys, and we accept that we are the cause of the problem. This problem will not be left to the victims. The focus, the responsibility is on us, the men. Something has to be done. We should not be seeing women victims or women's groups parading the streets of Sinkor or Liberia or Tubman Boulevard, only women raising their voices. Until we, the men, say this should not happen to our mothers, this should not happen to our sisters, our nieces, our female colleagues and friends, we are not going to be able to prevent this problem. That is my little point quickly, but my point is not as weighty as anything we can hear from Judge Ayemiye in Bayelsa State. Judge Ayemiye, let's try you again on audio alone. Could you please come through for us?
Okay. Okay.
No video.
Yes, no video.
Okay, you are clear now. I think you are clear now.
Yeah, yes. For me, the recommendations, the few recommendations I have is sensitization or advocacy of the citizenry on their rights, because a lot of people, what we found out is that a lot of people don't even know their rights when they are violated. So there's the need for us to sensitize the citizenry and carry out advocacy programs. And FIDA, generally in Nigeria, is doing a lot. In Bayelsa, they have the advocacy program, Say No to Rape. And then another thing is punishment, because the punishment for rape will be a deterrent to a lot of people. A situation where you have a life imprisonment for as punishment. I remember a case which I did that a 13-year-old girl was violated, and I gave him life imprisonment. You know, it was a deterrent to those in that community. And then we should think of the victims also, and how we are going to rehabilitate them, especially from the rural areas. But this case I did for the 13-year-old girl, I was informed later that, you know, they don't see it as anything in that community. It's something that is normally done, and they just settle amongst themselves. FIDA is doing a lot, and I think that case too, it was FIDA Bayelsa that went out and made sure that the perpetrator was brought to court and was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. And then I want to talk about the youth. We find out that a lot of these sexual and gender-based violence are perpetrated by the youth. And then we must create an enabling environment for youths. We must, you know, a situation like during the pandemic, a situation where people are forced to stay indoors without basic social amenities, and government financial assistance can make a sane person derail. You know, in situations like this, and without hope of daily survival, people prefer to commit crime and go to prison where they are sure of free accommodation and meals. We have cases where when you even, the person after serving his sentence, he will still come out and he will do the same thing. And they will tell you that they have free food in prison. So we must look at how we are going to help the youth and the citizenry as a whole, so that these people are there, they need to be engaged. In Africa, we have a problem. Okay. Our youth are not engaged. So I think that those are the few recommendations for now that I have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We could hear you clearly from everything you've stated very clearly. I see Dr. SMS, I believe from Liberia, saying President Weah must walk the talk, deeds, not words. Our girls are used as breadwinners for the family. President Weah needs to focus on the vulnerable, the girls and the women. Rehabilitation of young perpetrators must be considered. The government has to include the rural areas in this conversation. So I'm going to give 2 minutes, or let me say 3 minutes each, to Councillor Coleman. Then I will go to Sister Lovette Saidis here. Councillor Coleman, for 3 minutes, give us bullet points about your key recommendations, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Some of my key recommendations will begin by saying that we should tackle SGBV from the root cause or causes. And I don't think that's what we are doing sufficiently. I will disagree with the suggestion that SGBV is a Liberian problem. No, SGBV is a global problem, but we have focused on Liberia because a result of the our 14-year war. And it was in other countries. In recent year, about 3 years ago, the government in Sierra Leone had to declare a state of emergency because of the high increase in the in sexual violence. So I will begin by saying, for us to be able to tackle this problem, I agree 100% with the Swedish ambassador, where she said that we should focus a little more on prevention. As we all know, prevention is better than cure. And that if we can prevent the occurrence of SGBV, it will be less expensive. And I don't think we are putting enough on prevention. One of the things I think is the mean cause of sexual violence, and which we need to sit down and think about, is that we live in a culture where we still have male-dominated society. We live in a male-dominated society where women and girls are not respected, where women and girls are still looked at as property, and where women and girls are not afforded equal rights and their rights are always violated. So when we start thinking about changing our mind and changing our attitude and our beliefs about the value of women and girls, we can start from somewhere. We need to, that again, because of the erosion of the family structure. Right now in Liberia, we have most families, you have only one parent family, and most time it's the mother. And as the mother becomes the father, the mother, the breadwinner, raising the children. And most instances, the children grow up on their own. We live in a country where we still have on our books where our girls can be married at 16. Yet we say that rape is, you must have, if you have sex with a girl be older than 18. On our books, it's still there. Customarily, we can still giving our girls at age 16. Until we can change these kinds of attitudes and beliefs and practices, the root cause still exists. So let's go to a recommendation. I wanted to make some specific recommendations.
Okay.
We begin by investing in our family and begin putting more thing in our family where our girls and our boys. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. You've got some good points. I'm going to go to the ambassador quickly, but before that, Sister Lovett, you have 1 or 2 minutes. Give us some 2 or 3 concrete recommendations, please.
All right, so thank you so much. The roadmap is actually government's own way of holding its feet to the fire. And the roadmap is actually interministerial, it's holistic, and it also gives government the ability to be able to account for what. The map also is comprehensive and detailed, but it's just the beginning of a right step in the right direction. And for me, I think it truly demonstrates a political will and ownership. So the degree of urgency and importance that's attached to it cannot be understated. And the pronouncement by the president making rape an emergency is also important. And I think it's a wake-up call. So quickly to the recommendations. I like to prefer like 3 recommendations. Yeah. So first, I think the roadmap should be reviewed. It's actually a 2-year plan. So I think it is good if there are semi-annual reviews or annual reviews along the way. Like this, we'll be able to see the overall implementation, and we can assess as to whether the implementation is on track or if it's contextualized, and if the issues which might require adaptation of the roadmap are being managed. So if we review this roadmap when it comes to implementation, then we'll be able to have a check and balance. And I also like to look on the area of kind of creating innovative or creative ideas around how we can amplify or say strengthen platforms for youth and children, because I think they are the ones who are mostly affected. And the issue of raising prevention, if they are aware and they are involved, we will have more prevention mechanisms. So this group of persons are also strategic in the fight in curbing SGBV, and the negative social norms and promoting positive behavioral change and also needs to be looked at. So I think change is a process. So therefore, once we engage rightly, we'll be able to see results as soon as possible. And lastly, the need awareness in the communities. We have to change the mindset of our people so that together we can inclusively end rape in Liberia.
Thank you, Lovett. Said is here. I see Amara NM Kane saying we need to find a more appropriate way for women, girls, and parents of children to take practical steps to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. Let them take responsibility to minimize their risk to being victimized. I agree, but I disagree. It is not the responsibility of the victims and their parents to take responsibility. The responsibility is those of us wicked, evil men and boys who think we can just go grab any little infant and mess them up or rape them. So you have a good point about education and informing our girls, our mothers, our fathers to protect potential victims. But the onus, the responsibility, the major responsibility is on any man who feel they can go and hold any woman or any little girl and rape them. That is where the problem is. We, the men, must change our mentality and attitude. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a bit too passionate, Ambassador, because Swedish people are less maybe than I am saying with a bit of West African passion and anger. Please, Ambassador, go ahead and give us your recommendations.
Thank you. I wouldn't be me if I didn't say that I am a proud representative of Swedish feminist foreign policy, which is about pointing out differences between men and women and girls and boys, and using the 3 R's, the rights, the representation, and the resources as the analytical tools to understand the situation. I don't think Liberia is singled out for its high rates of SGBV at this moment in time. I think Liberia at this moment in time is simply singled out because of its reaction, of its national response. And I'm both moved and touched by the huge engagement in your society to let this pain come forward and take space in the public, and you're listening to the witnesses, you're listening to the pain. Your own reaction, Ben, is significant for an intelligent and emotional and reaction on the ability of walking somebody else's shoes that's coming from the men. And this will not change if men don't change, if men don't take a look at masculinity and what is valued in a man. And I think you can speak a lot more about good fatherhood, about the important things that men do to keep society good and sane. Then among yourselves, you have, I think, more influence over men who misbehave and who abuse women and children. And you need to start talking about this because it affects you. And you're very right, it's not the victims that can do this. It's about stopping the rapists. As regards recommendations, Liberians came together at this conference. The government responded, you have a roadmap. The roadmap is good enough. I'm sure there are things that can be added and improved, and those who have these ideas should step forward. But it's upon us and Liberians alike now to focus on this. There is no magic man that's going to fix this situation. The roadmap needs to be monitored, it needs to be implemented, it needs to be assessed, it needs to be financed. And I would like to commend the government of Liberia for setting aside $2 million to support its implementation. This means sustainability. It's assured in the allocation of national resources. And we will also, of course, contribute to this. And lastly, you have existing institutions and existing mechanisms. This doesn't require inventing new things. Take care of what is there, make sure that it works, make sure that it's used the way it is intended, and actually strengthen the good people you have, and they are many. They're just not as connected as they need to be. And maybe this discussion now can create that network. Thank you.
Tusen tack, Ambassador Wetterquist. I know that it is 8 minutes to 2 p.m. GMT in Liberia, 8 minutes to 3. We have overrun the time. Partly it's due to me, forgive me. And I need to apologize to David Owolabi, Helena Turo, Rachel Fitzpatrick, David Solo, and Amara Kane, because they've had their hands up for several minutes, and I feel like a bad headmaster or school teacher who refused to call the student who wanted to make a point. Blame it on me, because time is against us, and we will continue this conversation through the organizers. And to stay within the time allotted, forgive me to bring this discussion to a close. I'm saying tusen tack to Sweden's ambassador to Liberia, Ambassador Ingrid Wetterquist. I am also saying a big thank you to Mr. Emmanuel Daniel Juf, the chairman of the first ever Human Rights Commission in the Gambia. I wish to say a big thank you to Her Lordship, Justice Matilda Abrakasa Ayemiye in Bayelsa State. Thank you for persevering and not giving up on us. You tried, and in the end, we got some recommendations from you. I'm going to say a big thank you to Councillor Coleman over there in Liberia. You are at the forefront. And also Sister Lovette Seydisiye, we thank you. Everybody, up to about 100 people in this webinar, I am saying thank you. But the last word must come from Dr. Roland Cole, the UNDP Chief Technical Advisor on the rule of law in Liberia. My job is done. It's been a privilege, and I hope we find solutions that rape stops and ends in Liberia. It's not just in Liberia. Some of the things being said I could relate to in Ghana. And so it's a problem, but we must all come together and stop this epidemic within a pandemic. Over to you, Dr. Roland Cole, please.
And thank you very much, Ben, for steering this ship so expertly. I want to endorse your thanks to the panelists, to Ambassador Wetterquist, Mr. Emmanuel Juf, Justice Abrakasa Ayemiye, Councillor Coleman, and Mrs. Seydi. Thank you all very much for your very distinguished recommendations. And I think that this conversation has been a very timely dialogue where we've been able to hear the voices of citizens, of people within the region, as well as women. The intention is to push and influence policy and innovative responses, but also to strengthen program implementation in relation to rule of law, especially having regard to responding to SGBV in line with the roadmap that has been recently validated. Finally, I wish to state that the recordings will be circulated, as well as the key points that have been raised during the question and answer session. Thank you once more, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you and bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. May God bless Liberia, and God bless us all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ben.